Hello, I'm Carol Doak, and I am so excited about the release of my newest book, 60 Fabulous Paper Piece Stars. What I'd like to do today is pretend that you come to my house to learn how to paper piece. So I'm going to show you exactly how easy it is to make these fabulous stars. So the first step is to choose the block design you'd like to make. So I'm going to choose the Delaware star, and the reason I'm choosing it is because it has the fewest number of pieces. It only has 40 pieces, and so I can show you quickly. But a block with 80 pieces, it's just going to take you a little bit more time to make, but still the same techniques are used. So step one is to go ahead and choose your fabrics and to cut them out according to the cutting list that's provided. So it tells you exactly how many pieces to cut, what size to cut, and where they're going to go in the block. So once I cut the fabric pieces out, what I'll do is stack them up and label them where they're used in the block. So I'm using the blue fabric as number 1. I'm using the pink fabric as number 2. I'm using the green fabric as number 3. And then I'm using the print fabric as 4 and 5. So my fabric pieces are all pre-cut. One of the things that you're going to want to do when you pre-cut your fabric pieces, if you cut them from a strip of fabric with a rotary cutter, they're going to be right side and wrong side. And so take the time to stack them all up, right side up. And the reason why you want to do that is so that when you pick up the fabric pieces to use them, you'll be handling them exactly the same way. Now, when it comes to the cutting list about the exact size to cut the fabric pieces, that's the size you need to be big enough to cover the area. But if I tell you to cut a strip or a piece of fabric that's 2 by 4, and you want to cut it 3 by 5, it will still work. You can always cut them larger, just don't cut them smaller. And so my fabric pieces are all pre-cut, and I have stacked them up in the order I'm going to use them, kind of like sew by number. So I'm going to move the camera down now so I can show you that what I did is I pre-cut or pre-made all of the foundations by scanning the image from the book. And so here's how the foundations will look in the book. They are specifically put to the outside edge of the book page, and this is a lay flat binding. So it's very easy to put this down on a copy machine or a scanner. My preference is to put it on a scanner and then save a PDF file on my computer. So having scanned these already, they're sitting right on my computer so I can print them out whenever I want to. The first thing though to check is make sure that you printed them out the correct size. So I've taken the ruler and measured that the foundation finishes exactly 6 inches. One of the things you can do if you have a digital image as a PDF is you can enlarge or reduce the PDF file a little bit. And so in the book there actually is a chart that tells you if you want to make a block smaller or larger, what percentage to enlarge or reduce the PDF file. If you reduce the PDF file, the same fabric pieces in the cutting list will still work. They'll just be bigger. The other thing is you'll notice that I've printed this out on not a copy paper. I've printed this out on my Carol Doak foundation paper. And the quality of this paper is that it will hold up during the sewing process. It's rough, so the fabric doesn't slip and slide on it. It's not bonded, so it will ease when I'm sewing the units together, and it will remove easily later. It also absorbs the ink in here since it's not coated, so that I don't have to worry about ink residue coming off when I iron. You never want to put an iron directly on top of the foundation, no matter what kind of paper you use, because you will smear that ink with your iron. So let me put the book over here for now. And I've set my whole sewing area up And I'm just going to move the camera down so you can see what it is I'm doing as I describe each step. So in order to cut all the foundations for the entire block, I am going to pin all 4 of them with a flat-headed pin. And the only reason to use this flat-headed pin is so that I don't run into a bump when I'm using my ruler. And so I'm just going to put the ruler down at least a 1/2 inch away from the outside sewing line. And again, it doesn't have to be exact cutting. It just needs to be more than a 1/2 inch or a 1/2 inch. And you'll notice that what I cut away were these block front drawings. These are helpful if you want to color your block in differently than I have in the book, and you get a perspective of what they're going to look like. So I'm just trimming away with my rotary cutter. Let me just tell you that I have been foundation piecing for nearly 30 years. And I've used my rotary cutter for those 30 years, and you are never dulling your rotary cutter cutting through paper. Paper is fiber just like fabric is. So now I'm going to cut through right through the middle of these foundations. And you'll notice that I have a B foundation. They're marked down here. It says that's B, and up here it's an A foundation. In the beginning, you can either just make one foundation all the way through, or you can assembly line sew the foundations. I do suggest if you assembly line sew in the beginning, just sew all the A's and then sew all the B's. But for speed, so I can show you the entire step, I'm going to go ahead and sew an A foundation all the way through. And so I'm going to start with the first piece of fabric, which I know is number 1. And so I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to place it on the blank side of the foundation. Now I always talk about the lined side and the blank side. I don't ever say right and wrong, because people sometimes call that the right side and it actually ends up being the back of the block. So this is the lined side and the blank side. And so I'm going to position the number 1 fabric. Now, as long as I cover the whole area, it doesn't matter how I position it. So I could position it this way so that it runs with the diamond in this direction, or I can position it diagonally right through the middle of the diamond. And so it's really your choice. It may be that you have, let's say, a stripe fabric, so you want the stripes to go this way, or you may want the stripes to go this way. So I'm just going to start off by positioning it in this direction. Now I can use the light on my sewing machine to see that I've covered all of the number 1 area. When I give you the size for the number 1 piece, I always give you the size that will accommodate positioning that number 1 piece in both directions, because I don't know which way you're going to want to position it. So I've taken a add a quarter ruler, and it has this little 1/4 inch lip right here, and I've attached it with a piece of tape to the right edge of a piece of cardboard, or in this case it's a postcard, which works fine, those mailers that you get. And the reason I attach it is because it's faster for me. So I'm going to show you how it would be if I didn't attach it. So I would put the postcard down on the line I'm going to sew, so that I'm exposing the area that I'm going to be adding a fabric. So this is on top of the number 1 fabric. So that's why the flat-headed pins are necessary. If I had a pin like, well, let's see if I can pull a pin. If I had a pin with a big ball top on it, I don't even have them, it would rock on that cardboard. So I put that on the line, I fold that back, and that exposes the excess number 1 fabric. And then I would pick up the add a quarter ruler and trim. But the advantage for me attaching this is if I flip that up, I fold this down, and I bring this down, and you see it's one quick step where I'm flipping it up and flipping it down. And so now the number 1 fabric has been trimmed. Now the advantage of pre-trimming means that the greatest amount of fabric is going to go to the area it needs to fill. So I'm going to pick up the number 2 fabric, and I'm going to place it right side up over the area it needs to fill. Now the reason why I put it right side up over the area it needs to fill, if I just went like this, the area I need to fill actually goes down here. So this kind of ballparks my brain. I need to fill that area. And then I'm going to flip it right sides together along the edge I just trimmed. Now I can guarantee that fabric is going to go straight up because I have a parallel line. And I can see that the ends of the piece I need to cover are here and here. So I have plenty of fabric that extends beyond both ends. So now I'm going to sew this seam. Now I can pin it or I can just hold on to it. Cotton fabric tends to cling. So I need to make sure that my stitch length on my sewing machine is set at 1.5, which is about 18 stitches to the inch. I'm using just a regular gray neutral color thread. I'm using a 90-14 needle. And so I'm going to hold this and slide it under the presser foot. And I'm going to start sewing about a 1/2 inch before the seam. And you notice I'm holding the other edge so it doesn't move. And then I'm going to stitch that seam. Now, if I was assembly line sewing these, I would have pinned all the number 1s, trimmed all the number 1s, pinned the number 2s, and I would have sent the next one through after I pulled this out. But since I'm just going to do the one all the way through, I'm going to go ahead and pull it out. Now, my next step is cut the threads. You really do save time if you cut them now. And I use these little curve pointed snips that save me a boatload of time. I'm just going to pull that thread up, and what it does is it pulls the bobbin thread up from the bottom, so that it lets me cut the thread on the top and bottom at the same time. So you see I can just lift those threads off. And now I'm going to go ahead and open the number 2 piece. I've got an iron set up here on a cotton setting, no steam. And so I've pressed the number 2 piece open. So now you're going to follow the sequence, I'm going to take that pin out, of trim, sew, press. If you used to cook, that's the same as the abbreviation for the word teaspoon. So I'm put the card on the line for number 3, and when I pull that back, I don't know if you noticed how quickly that happened. Because I'm using this foundation paper, because I'm using the right needle size and the right stitch length, that just pulled away, but it's still sewn through the seam allowance. So now I'm going to bring this at a quarter ruler down and trim that edge exactly 1/4 inch from the fold. I knew I didn't catch that seam. There we go. So now I'm going to pick up my next piece of fabric, which is the number 3 piece, and I'm going to follow the same procedure. I see where number 3 goes from here, and if I was at the sewing machine, again, the light on the sewing machine would show me it goes from here all the way down to the point. So I'm going to place it right side up over the area it needs to fill, flip it right sides together along that edge I just trimmed, and I can see there's the end, it goes beyond there. There's the point, it goes beyond there. So I'm going to now go back and sew this seam exactly on the line. So I will stitch that seam line. I think that might be a little small. I'm also using an open toe presser foot. The open toe just means I can see the needle sew right into the line. And again, I'm clipping these threads as I go. And go ahead and press this. Tried to set up this little tight space so that you could see all the steps. So now it's time to add the next piece, which is number 4. And number 4 is a triangle. So I'm going to put the card on the line for number 4, and I fold that back. If it doesn't pull out easily like this just did, if you're using copy paper, that will probably happen. Just pull it. And now I'm going to pick up the number 4 triangle. And again, placing that, I can see the triangular shape right side up over the area it needs to fill. Flip it right sides together along this edge I just trimmed. Now, to position the triangles correctly, you always want to position the corner of the fabric to the corner of the design. And if those are in a straight line, you'll know that'll fill the area. If I had put it like this, this corner would go up here and I would be short on this side. So again, you are given the exact size to cut these triangles. So if you center the triangle on the space, it will fill the area perfectly. And we'll sew this seam. Now, when you're sewing on the lines, the times you really want to pay attention when you're sewing is when you get to places that are matching points, places that create a point. And so in between those areas, you don't have to be perfectly on the line, you just need to be close. So now I'm going to press that one. And we're going to put the final piece in this foundation. Now, once you get comfortable with this system of put the card on the line you're going to sew, you notice how I just pulled those away, and then go ahead and put the add a quarter ruler down and trim so you have a 1/4 inch seam allowance. That's exactly 1/4 inch away from the sewing line. And we're going to pick up the last piece of fabric, which is the corner triangle. And again, we place it right side up. This right side up helps to orient the fabric so it's in the correct position. And now on this one, I'm not, you notice I'm scooching the fabric down because here's the outside seam line. And here's the diagonal seam line. If I put this on and it was way up here and I sewed and flipped it, you see how I would be short along the diagonal line. And so I want to make sure that I have a 1/4 inch beyond the seam line at the top, which will give me the 1/4 inch at the bottom. So now I'm going to go ahead and stitch that one. Now this is a matching point when I go to put A and B together. It's the only matching point between A and B. So you notice how I went slowly to stay right on that line. Now I'm not going to go ahead and cut the threads because when I trim this block up, the threads will get cut. So I'm just going to press that one out. And so here is the completed foundation. So now what I want to do is trim it exactly a 1/4 inch from the outside edge. Now when it comes to trimming your foundations, this is a place again where you really want to pay attention, because when I put this exactly the 1/4 inch line on my ruler exactly on the outside sewing line, I'm adding a 1/4 inch for seam allowance. And if I do that with the B block exactly the same way, they will line up perfectly when I go to join them. So I'm taking my time to put the 1/4 inch line on the ruler, on the sewing line and trimming away everything beyond the 1/4 inch. So now, and this really does pay off to really take your time to trim these foundations the exact size they need to be. So here is the completed A foundation. So now what I want to do in the interest of time is take you through joining the A and B foundations. So these were the actual samples from the book. And so what I did is I took an A and a B completed foundation, and I just tapped the bottom edge, because remember they were trimmed exactly 1/4 inch away, and I pinned the corner, they match. I pin the ends, they match, and then I pin the middle section. That's the one matching point along this seam. Now you notice these pins are not in this seam line at all, and the reason they aren't is because if I put it in and move it, it will distort the seam line. So what I do is set the stitch length on the sewing machine to about an 8, and I machine base just the beginning. I move it, see here's the thread, to the middle matching point, and then here's the thread, see, I move it down to the end. Now this is a pretty long space if you want to tack it a few places in between. I typically say every 3 inches or matching point. And then what I get to do is open this up. Actually, let me take the pins out so I can show you that, and make sure it's a good match before I sew it with the small stitch. And so when I open that up, you can see that that center right there is perfect, and that's the only matching point. So let me put these pins back in over here. Don't want to pin on the cutting mat that I'm going to cut. Okay, so once those match with the basting, I go ahead and sew with the small stitch, and I guarantee that's not going to move. Again, one of the advantages of this paper not being bonded is that it doesn't have glue in the fibers, so it allows the easing in between here when you're sewing the seam line so that the basted areas will not move. And then what I will do before I press it open is use a pair of scissors, and let me give you a close-up look. You see how I've trimmed the very end of each end of this triangle right there and there from the outside edge in. And the reason for doing that, if I open this up, can you see how there's no paper in the seam allowance there? And so when I go to put 4 sections together, let's start with the 2/4. So when I go to match them, again, it's pinning, 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 baste, baste, baste. Make sure this is a good match, and then I will go ahead and sew it with a small stitch. And then I would press this. I'll make 2 halves with this seam allowance right here in the middle. With the seam allowance right here in the middle, to me it's going to the right. So it's going this direction. So I make 2 halves exactly like this. If I turn this over, can you see the seam allowance here is going here, here. I didn't mention, let me go back to this one. When I'm doing a 1/4, is that the one that's basted? Oh, here it is. When I'm pressing the A and the B sections, I always press towards the B. So this is the B foundation. So when I'm pressing A and B, I always press towards the B. And when we talk about pressing, again, cotton setting, no steam, and always from the fabric. You never put the iron on the back on the seam allowance. So by pressing towards the B, if you look at the back, that this seam allowance goes this way, the middle goes this way, this goes this way. So I'm already swirling the seam allowances. And then when I go to do the 2 halves, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to pin the ends, I'm going to pin these matching points. And then the last thing I'm going to pin is the center. And by having these seam allowances in the middle go in opposing directions, they lock into place. I always hear people say, oh, I open the seams. There's two problems I have with opening seams. When you open a seam, you expose the thread. You've got the fabric going this way and the fabric going this way, and what's exposed is the thread. And the other thing is, take the concept of putting a black line on two mirrors and try to line up that black line where they slide. If you have a ridge that you have from pressing your seam allowance in opposite directions, they lock into place. And so after I pin the ends, pin the matching point, pin the center, I machine base each of those, open it up and make sure that it's a good match. When I open this up, that center is absolutely perfect, going in all directions, and then I would sew it with a small stitch. Now, the trick I use in the very center area of the block is, as I'm sewing with 18 to 20 stitches to this point, when I get about ½ inch, an inch away from the center, I go down to about a 1. I use a really tiny stitch from here to here, and then I go back to my regular 1.5. The reason I do that is we have all these sections, there's 8 sections coming together, and they tend to want to push against each other. And by doing that really tiny stitch in the middle, it pulls it in so tight that you can't see any thread at all. And so that's one of the tips that you can use to be able to make sure that that happens. So now your block is all complete, and you can start on either, if you were going to make a whole quilt, assembly line sewing A's and B's, and then joining them just the way we did. So I hope these tips and this process will help you as you're making your star blocks. And as I said, the blocks with more pieces, it's exactly the same technique. It's just that you are taking more time to do it. So this was a 40-piece block. You saw how quickly I made that A section. If you were doing an 80-piece block, it would have just taken me twice the amount of time. So enjoy the new book. I can't wait to see the star blocks that you're going to make with the new book, and I hope this was helpful.